Oh. All right, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I'd like to begin by congratulating all the groups that presented before us. Congratulations for a semester of hard work, excellent presentations, and the end of a successful first year at the Frank Batten School. I'd also like to take this time to thank the Frank Batten School of Leadership and Public Policy and Senator Warner's office for all of their help along the way in our project. Special thanks go out to Professor Eric Protashnik, Adelina Bryant, and Marvin Figuera for constantly being available resources throughout our project. Today, we will be talking about why more Virginians should pursue career technical education. I'm Yuhan, and I'll give a brief background on the issue. Ann Lawrence will cover some criteria that we evaluated potential solutions on and introduce some of our alternatives. Alex will discuss our remaining alternatives, and Kurt will deliver our recommendation, implementation, and further considerations. I'd like to begin with some simple facts. Currently, about 2/3 of high school students attend college. And while this is indeed a promising number, college may not be cost beneficial for everyone, and here's why. As shown on this graph, of the 66% of high school students that graduate and go to college every year, 40% will drop out. While many students in this room are getting ready to walk the lawn in a few weeks, 2 out of every 5 college students will not have this privilege. Now, among those who do manage to graduate, here are their turnouts. A 2012 study on college graduates found that of graduates since 2006, only 51% had full-time employment. 11% were unemployed, and of those employed, 43% were working in jobs where a college degree was not necessary. What these statistics tell us is that there is a surplus of bachelor degrees. Now, even with this surplus, tuition continues to rise and student debt with it. From 2006 to 2014, average student loan debt in Virginia increased by 27%, and today, the average debt is just over $25,000. So we have students in debt and degrees that don't return on their investment. Clearly, there's an overvaluation of the college degree, and college does not pass the cost-benefit test for everyone. So does this mean that students who drop out of college or are unemployed should have stopped their education in high school? Not necessarily, because statistics show us that 31% of recent high school graduates are unemployed, and on top of that, 5,000 students drop out of school every year. So it seems that there are students who choose to go to college that could have been better off not doing so. And there's also high school students who could benefit from having more than just a high school degree. For these students, the solution is somewhere in between high school and college. Now, it may just simply be that unemployment is due to a lack of jobs, but again, statistics show that this is not true. In fact, recent data cites over 700,000 jobs open in trade, transportation, and utility sectors, and over 250,000 jobs open in manufacturing. These jobs, however, are the hardest to fill because they require an intermediary education between high school and college. This intermediary education is career technical education, or CTE. Career technical education is a field of education that integrates core academic knowledge with technical and occupational knowledge. There are numerous types of 2-year CTE degrees that would qualify a person to fill one of these millions of open job positions that are currently unfilled. Career technical education also encompasses healthcare occupations, which currently makes up 12 out of the 20 fastest growing occupations. So what separates a career technical education degree from other 2-year degrees is the level of specialization that these degrees focus on. CTE degree earners are more qualified to fill currently empty job openings and also earn 17.4% higher first-year wages at the same cost. And so why aren't these students who would be better off attending CTE programs enrolling in those CTE programs? The answer is a social stigma and a lack of information. Students are unaware of the potential financial burdens that come with attaining a college degree, and they're unaware of the opportunities that lie in CTE programs. So here's our fundamental problem. There are openings in the job market, but college students, whether they drop out or graduate but remain unemployed, are not filling these jobs. And high school students simply don't have the training to fill these jobs. These students would be better off attaining some middle level of education. So we know that CTE programs would both save these students money and would prepare them for with the technical education that they need for these jobs. So how do we get more students to these CTE programs? Ann Lawrence and Alex will evaluate 4 different options that might answer this question.
Thanks, Yuhan. Now, given the problem presented by Yuhan, we've set 5 main criteria to evaluate our policy alternatives. The first is change in post-secondary CTE levels, where we look for increased CTE enrollment for students after high school. The second criterion is change in high school CTE course enrollment levels, where we will assess the different alternatives based on change in course enrollment, leading to increased graduation and then subsequently transition into post-secondary CTE programs. Third is employer perception. We assess the connection between programs and industry, as well as the increased employer recognition of CTE skills. Fourth is political feasibility to assess acceptance and implementation given the political climate, including public opinion, lobbying interests, and congressional approval. Our final criterion is the cost, or estimated monetary price to implement. Our first alternative is a more effective information data system. Since 1990, the Right to Know Before You Go Act requires institutions eligible for federal funding to submit an annual report on graduation rates for full-time degree-seeking students. These aggregated data sets are stored in the Integrated Post-Secondary Education Data System, or IPEDS. We propose it is time to update the system similar to the federal Student Right to Know Before You Go Act, currently in the Senate, by replacing existing IPEDS with a statewide, individual-level system which excludes any personally identifiable data, thus protecting student privacy, but also matching transcript data for future outcomes. All right. So the goal with this is really to help students best assess costs and benefits of educational opportunities. The revamped IPEDS system holds programs accountable by collecting data on job placement, expected earnings, transfer and dropout rates, course pass rates, and debt accumulation. Some of this Virginia has already started collecting, but it's far too limited in scope for the 21st century. So if you look at this visual on the 2012 comparative degree earnings, it shows, for example, a CTE nursing degree first-year wage would be greater than my liberal arts government degree wage. So this is just a start, but you can visually see how expanded data would help students recognize the value of CTE in occupational education that they may not have originally considered. So once more real data is aggregated, we will make it available for analysis and dissemination at all levels. So from students to parents, teachers, schools, and employers, all through an education campaign. Once we have greater data about the effectiveness, then stakeholders can make the most informed choices about the benefits of CTE. So for the evaluation of this alternative, it provides increased understanding of potential outcomes based on graduation rates and future earnings given job placement and wage data at relatively low costs and moderate implementation feasibility to the government. So our second alternative combines increasing and reallocating funding to both students and CTE programs to increase overall productivity. In order to balance pressure to attend 4 years schools, the government should change monetary incentives in 2 respects. First, the government can incentivize students to attend productive CTE programs through grants and scholarships. Second, it can incentivize programs to spend federal funds efficiently and produce workforce-ready and employable students. So on the student side, this alternative advocates for the creation of more student grants for CTE programs. We acknowledge that this is not as politically feasible, but it still presents a solution to a very real problem when you can see that 54% of young adults claiming the need to work and make money and 31% claiming the inability to afford tuition as major reasons for dropping out of post-secondary education. So reducing these major financial pressures through scholarships would obviously create effective positive change in CTE enrollment rates. On the school side, our goal for incentivizing productive schools is to ensure tuition leads directly to job placement. We will redefine specific standards that programs must meet in regards to pass rates, data collection, uniform language, and workforce preparedness as outlined in this slide. This can be facilitated, hopefully, through the upcoming 2014 reauthorization of the Perkins Career and Technical Education Act. But even if underfunded by federal appropriations to the states, there's opportunity for smaller and substantial changes to be made at a local level on these same points when it comes to the implementation of the State Workforce Investment Board. So for evaluation, The allocation of funding should incentivize productive programs and increase enrollment in CTE programs, and connect students to industry and job placement, but it comes at a relatively unfeasible time for increasing education funding at a federal level. So Alex will detail a couple other alternatives for us.
Thanks, Ann Lawrence. The third option we'd like to present is to create a new diploma pathway for all the high school students in Virginia. This alternative would give high school students two options to finish their high school education, working towards a workforce-prepared diploma or a college-prepared diploma. College-prepared diploma would be very similar to how a typical high school diploma is organized today, in which high school education is focused on college prep curriculum and courses to put them in the best position to succeed in a four-year university. However, the new workforce-prepared diploma would focus elsewhere. Students would be required to take 6 additional courses of CTE throughout their high school careers. These courses could be completed either through high school classes or through dual enrollment with local community colleges, as is the current system in Virginia now. The main motivation for this alternative is to try to put career technical education on the same level as college prep education. In this way, we hope to lessen the negative stigma behind CTE learning when compared to four-year universities that currently exist in Virginia and the United States as a whole. Furthermore, the workforce diploma would encourage the exploration of different CTE options while still in high school and make a better understanding for students about their post-secondary education options and also their career options coming out with their workforce-prepared diploma. This dual degree diploma would be a contrast to CTE programs that are currently in place in the state of Virginia right now. The main one of these being the federally created Career Clusters program. The Career Clusters program creates 16 different clusters of education, CTE education fields in which a student can elect to specialize in throughout their high school career, taking 4 to 6 courses in one of these clusters. However, these clusters have very little overlap with each other, so a student must choose very early on which CTE field they would most like to put their efforts in. The Workforce Prepared Diploma gets rid of this by allowing students to explore many different options throughout, and also, instead of preparing them for a certain career, acting as a signal for employers of just their CTE aptness and their ability to understand such material. This would also hope to, career clusters programs also do not address the stigma associated, as very little is done upon graduation to differentiate these students from their college-oriented peers. Having a workforce-prepared diploma would signal right away to employers and post-secondary institutions their ability in CTE-type classes. The outcomes for this alternative are mixed, however. We expect both an increase in sustained high school and post-secondary CTE enrollment for sure. High school, because they now have tangible recognition of their abilities and lessening of the stigma of CTE, and for post-secondary because there's more interest now generated at the high school level to funnel into these types of institutions. Employers are also happier as they get an increased signal of a high school grad's ability with CTE training with no cost to them. This is also moderately feasible alternative, as many other states across the country within the past 2 years have implemented similar programs. Most recently, North Carolina in 2013, set to take effect in 2015, and Washington this year. However, the costs of this are extremely high. Recent estimates place this at about $90 million being allocated to the high schools alone to make them able to teach this material. There's also a concern about extra costs to post-secondary CTE education programs if enrollment is increased. However, for Virginia, we don't expect this to be as major because currently enrollment in these schools is dropping right now the past few years anyway, so the increased enrollment should make up for this drop. The fourth alternative we'd like to present is letting present trends continue. As my colleague Yuhain described earlier, there's currently a high demand for jobs in CTE fields without enough qualified people to fill them. Therefore, one might view this problem as a simple market lag, and people will naturally begin to shift towards these opportunities if the demand for them and the salaries of these because of that demand increases. However, there's reason to believe that it's not that simple. Instead, there may be market failures involved, mostly in the lack of information being sent to students and the negative stigma against CTE education, creating a complex distortion of rationality when choosing to consume more CTE education going forward. Therefore, the outcomes of this are mixed as well. We expect relatively little change in sustained enrollment as the market failures mean there's little incentive for students to change their behavior. Furthermore, employers have long been dissatisfied with the prevalence of CTE throughout the state of Virginia, and therefore this is expected to continue as well. However, obviously, since not too much money is being spent and nothing's being done, it's a highly politically feasible option, especially as we've seen education cuts across the boards throughout the last several years, and any spending on these types of programs is always questioned heavily. While there's no direct cost with letting this continue, there's huge opportunity cost of both the unemployment seen out of high school with no education and the unnecessary college debt that students are racking up to try to fulfill their requirements.
Thanks, Alex. Before we look at our outcomes matrix, we wanted to note another sort of CTE proposal that emphasizes the role of employers. Specifically in Northern and Eastern Europe, many students choose apprenticeship programs after their first 2 years of high school. In these programs, students often spend 3 days on the job and 2 days in the classroom. At the end of 3 years, students receive a specific qualification and transition smoothly into the job market. As you can see on this graph, more than half of students in many European countries choose these kinds of career and vocational programs. Although we didn't include this option in our analysis because of cultural differences, political feasibility issues, and infrastructure concerns, policymakers should consider testing this sort of program at the local level in order to assess program effectiveness. Looking to the future, this could be a viable policy choice after the issues of information asymmetry and social stigma are addressed. Next, we created an outcomes matrix to evaluate each of our 4 alternatives based on our 5 criteria. As you can see on the left, here are our 4 alternatives, and on the top, the criteria. These numbers projected in the change in enrollment and over here in the cost are based on looking at similar examples in other states. In light of this, we recommend the expansion of the statewide unit record system and the dissemination of CTE information. By examining best practices such as the Go Build Georgia initiative, we can project a high degree of increased CTE program enrollment, improved employer satisfaction, and low annual costs for this politically feasible alternative. This alternative also receives strong support from an expert in CTE policy. The biggest thing we can do is convince parents that CTE programs are not a step-down alternative. CTE programs prepare students to be career-ready, and we need people to understand that they can be just as beneficial financially and career-wise as a 4-year degree. When we think about how to implement this policy, we recommend a few important action steps for the Virginia Department of Education. First, collect additional state longitudinal data in order to allow richer policy analysis. Second, deliver relevant and accurate information to every student, teacher, and parent in Virginia using a comprehensive media strategy. And third, hold annual professional development seminars and community-wide presentations to consistently spread the latest information across Virginia. We started this presentation by arguing that too few Virginians are pursuing career and technical education. Pathways to Prosperity, a project based in the Harvard Graduate School of Education, projects that the U.S. economy will create over 47 million jobs over the 10-year period ending in 2018, and nearly 2/3 of these will require some level of post-secondary education. The graph above me shows the breakdown of Americans by level of educational attainment. Look at the yellow section here, which indicates a high school degree or less. Having a CTE degree would open up job opportunities for many of these high school graduates and high school dropouts. America now has the highest college dropout rate in the industrialized world. Look at the orange section and think about the part labeled some college. Having a CTE degree would provide a more practical alternative for many of these college dropouts. So this is the question we're facing. Since most Americans don't complete a bachelor's degree, what are we doing to prepare all of our students for rewarding and productive careers? Let me answer this question in light of our project's motivation. The impetus for this report was Senator Warner's desire for more evidence-based policymaking. In the same way, we want our students to choose their educational path based on the evidence. By providing detailed, relevant information to parents, teachers, and counselors, we can connect high school students with the education they need to meet the demands of high-growth industry jobs. Thank you for listening. We'd love to hear your questions.
I thought that was actually a pretty awesome presentation. So way to round it out, guys. My question is, though, it still seems like you are putting people who are relatively young into pathways pretty early on, and I'm wondering if you comment about any concerns over if somebody decides to lock into being a welder, at the age of 15, or a firefighter or a police officer at 15, and then they change their mind when they're 17 because they took an awesome chemistry class. Are there ways to transition back into the other degree program, or how does that work out?
I mean, yeah, unfortunately, the reality is a lot of career decision making is made in high school, whether that's going to college or something like that. So I think through our recommendation of a lot more information, the best we're trying to do is give everybody the correct data backing up their decision and what type of things they would like to look at. Another major aspect of that is one of the really harmful thing is one of the biggest groups of CTE enrollers in the entire country, as well as Virginia, are people over the age of 30 who got a bachelor's degree, were dropped out of college, accumulated on average $25,000 worth of debt, and now go back for further CTE education. So we wanted to look at that and say, there's other options from the start. There's no need for you to jump into this career path right away, make this debt of that $25,000 and then not have a way out of that. So while yes, it's really difficult to put people on the spot in the high school, it's just the reality of the system, and by giving them as much information as possible, hopefully we can avoid them making decisions that will be detrimental to them in the future, such as debt in that regard.
Thank you.
Thanks.
I actually have a related question. So I think what we're getting at here is we would like to make more optimal matches between students and what they should be doing, and different information will lead kids to make different decisions. And so the piece of information you showed was sort of the first year out salary, and I would venture a guess that, for example, Ann Lawrence's degree would do better on some other measures as compared to some degrees. I'm not just speculating there. And so it would matter whether you show sort of like average lifetime earnings or variance in earnings, or other measures like unemployment, things like that. So I wonder if you've thought about what these data elements should be and what sort of information we should be giving kids to help them make these sorts of decisions.
I think you're absolutely right. I mean, it's very important to tell students the full picture. We don't want to just say, here's your starting salary, make a choice. So I think for a lot of people, it would be best to pursue a bachelor's degree because that, the potential for increased earnings. But looking at the numbers of these huge amounts of kids who are dropping out of high school, who are dropping out of college, having that option as an alternative to, a very basic kind of McDonald's-style job or something else would be incredibly beneficial for them, even if it doesn't lead to that high level of earnings in the end.
Just to add to that also, the issue's changing a lot right now with the huge tech boom of late. A lot of these CTE careers are not the same type of manufacturing job that we've seen, that previous lifetime earners are gaining that wage. We have seen trends from 1990 onward with the tech explosion and everything of that gap closing as more of these jobs require, it's not just in a factory, it's you're doing computer work, you're doing that type of work, and a 2-year degree can prepare you for that. So lifetime earning projections are kind of difficult right now as we're seeing this gap of this mismatch of not enough people filling CTE fields and their salaries are continuously rising. So it's going to be a matter of how much we correct that mismatch in the future to actually be able to project those outcomes as well.
It seems like a really important component of CTE programs working, if not the crux of it, is employers' satisfaction with the outcomes and their willingness to hire graduates. And so you mentioned employer satisfaction being somewhat low in Virginia. I was wondering what exactly employers were dissatisfied with and what you would see and how you'd see your proposal sort of addressing those concerns on their end.
Something employers have difficulty with, even at a national level, is differentiating and trying to break down what exactly the CTE skill set translates into. Like, what exactly does that certification mean, especially when the certification is listed under like a different name with different schools between different kind of statewide initiatives. So something that would be really helpful for employer satisfaction would be for them to directly know what skills the students bring to the table when they're hired, whether that be coming out of high school with CTE kind of certification, or kind of getting all the different CTA programs, at least in the state of Virginia, on the same page, so there's a greater kind of employer perception of of exactly what those skills are.
Just to add that as well, it's also a factor that employers just aren't seeing people go for the training that they're requiring right now. An example of this is Dominion Power Plant. They've been looking for technical people there a lot and having trouble filling their locations. Another CTE program in Virginia, the name escapes me right now, is experiencing 100% placement rates out of their school. However, the demand, so the demand there is from the employers, and their dissatisfaction comes from the fact that the supply is just not reaching that right now. And we believe a large factor of that is the information aspect, although there's other stigmas as well and that type of thing. So I think their overall dissatisfaction comes with our dissatisfaction as well of the information available, the stigma against it.
And just to add on to that a little bit more, to expand on Ann Lawrence's point, one of the major issues with just the general bachelor's and the influx of bachelor's is that a degree is really meant to be a signaling mechanism. And a bachelor's can mean a host of different things. For an employer who's looking for someone who's really familiar with computers, a bachelor could mean that you worked with computers your entire 4 years at college, or you could mean that you never touched on a computer in your 4 years here. Even among computer science majors, a lot of the classes are theoretical, and some of them are actually working with programming. And so when you do have the standardized CTE certificates that say this student has these specific skill sets, it becomes a lot easier for employers to hire people to recognize what's available to them.
So we've already kind of seen in the present day how there's this huge difference between the type of students that are enrolled in CTE classes and the type of students who go and attain bachelor's degrees from four-year institutions. And I'm curious as to if you're worried at all that a promotion and expansion of CTE programs will kind of further exacerbate the problems between kind of this making higher education the bastion of the elite and the wealthy, while lower income students end up going into CTE programs because they're cheaper and they'll get out of school quicker and able to join the workforce.
I think one point, I'd like to hear your thoughts as well. One point to that is that CTE versus bachelor's, I don't like to think of them as a tiered system. It's a different set of skills. It's a different kind of aptitude. So some people are more wired towards those sorts of careers and some are not. So I think regardless of your background, it really depends on what would be the best career to match your interests and your desires.
And
Also, sorry.
go ahead, Alex.
Obviously, that's a concern as well. There's going to be a gap between those type of things, just because it's been deep set in this country, like you said, for so long that four-year degrees are typically associated with the wealthier and that type of thing, and that's closing where everybody's trying to get the four-year degree now. However, I think the pure wage structure of CTE degrees nowadays, or CTE careers, is kind of bringing that down, where just the pure fact that a lot of people go into a job, yes, because they like it, but also because they expect to make money from it. And if you're looking at these types of jobs and they're experiencing huge demand with increased salaries because of that demand, hopefully that could address that issue a little bit more, especially with correct information being distributed about it. Johan, you want to add?
Well, Alex actually covered most of what I wanted to say, but you do bring up a great point, which is there is this underlying social stigma between higher education and CTE. And that's one of the things that all these alternatives are going to have to battle if they are to succeed. It's kind of an uphill battle from the beginning. But if we don't try to tackle this issue first and students just keep going to college believing that that's indefinitely the best path for them, and 40% of them end up dropping out every year, that's not ideal under any circumstances. And so yes, we're fighting an uphill battle, but the end result should be worth it in the long run.
I guess just one of the points I was trying to make is that it's not just that there's a social stigma, there's also very real incentives for our lower income students to take the less expensive route. So I was wondering, I guess, if you guys have put any thought into how to kind of alleviate those incentives. Not so much take them away, but to also make a four-year college an equally rewarding experience, I guess.
Yeah, I think we kind of address the half of the quote-unquote like student mismatch problem in that there is the obvious, we kind of address the gap between students who may not be best, kind of the college dropouts, or the ones who are not as likely to graduate from high school, not necessarily the very achieving students who should go on to to higher education, and that's a whole nother topic that we could write another IPA project on. But I think the positive thing to look at is that job market availability, there are jobs. So it is a positive thing, and there are kind of like very like physical, obvious returns on the CTE program. So even kind of if, you know, the incentives are there to go the less expensive route, and that's shown with greater data collection, then at least there's a job kind of at the end of the tunnel, that there is a direct connection to industry and jobs, earnings. That's all a positive thing.
I think another thing you're referencing is the fact that it's going to cost a student, on average, about $4,000 maximum a year to attain like a CTE certification over a 2-year period, while it's costing students sometimes, in the case, $20,000 a year to go to one of those institutions. And obviously, we're not going to be increasing CTE to the same level as that cost and excluding all of that. So I think one of the main ways to address that, obviously, is a huge reduction in the cost of 4-year education and that type of things. And unfortunately, the resources just aren't there right now for that. And we've seen college prices rising steadily since the 70s. We've seen, even with the recession, levels of it still going up and that type of thing. And I think it's only the stigma that's going to attach to that. And we can't feasibly bring the cost of 4-year colleges down to the level of CTE 2-year colleges right now and that type of thing yet as well. So it's an issue for sure, but I'm just not sure how much we'd be able to address that right off the bat. The best I think we could do is do the information social stigmas against it.
So this kind of continues the discussion that we've been having so far about comparing 4-year colleges to the CTE program. I was really struck by how a lot of students in 4-year colleges are indeed dropping out, and recently I've had a few of my friends just kind of drop out because they couldn't take pressure. It wasn't really about the tuition, but about the second reason that you guys mentioned in the beginning of the slide, the second largest, which was just like, it's just like too much pressure, so they just kind of quit. So a lot of students quit. So if we were to kind of strengthen things like CAPS and other counseling measures that help students alleviate stress and stay in schools, how would that counteract with the CTE measure? So does the attempt to have more students stay in colleges go with the CTE mission, or is it totally separate? Like, what do you guys think?
I think there is a mental health component of that type of thing, the pressures of attending these schools, the pressure of graduating from these schools as well. But again, we do have a lot of evidence right here that shows, as a major reason, the most ones are money-based, financial-based, and that's the reason why they're not attending schools as much anymore. So yeah, I think that's a component, absolutely, and I think that doesn't just affect 4-year students as well. I think that affects second-year students as well. They can't deal with the type of education they're expected to obtain, something like that. But I think by addressing the financial aspect of it first, it might be a better way to go about it than trying to stop the dropout problem that way.
And I want to briefly address the other side of that argument too, which is students do drop out for financial reasons. They drop out because they feel a lot of pressure. But as you see we just changed it. But as you can see up there, where is it? Oh, useless classes. About 40% of students who dropped out said at least partially the reason was just because they felt like the classes they were taking weren't going to prepare them for whatever work they were going to do after college. So at some point they realized that it wasn't cost beneficial. In fact, 81% of these students say they might have stayed in college if the courses were career relevant. And so with CTE training, where you do have this very extensive level of specific job training, you could have prevented some of these dropouts.
Stay in school.